Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock. Ministers have struck a deal to ensure supplies of carbon dioxide from a major producer to businesses until January. CF Fertilisers shut down its 2 UK plants last month because of the rising price of energy, affecting numerous industries. Customers have agreed to pay higher rates, is the Chief Executive of the Food and Drink Federation, Ian Wright.
We don't know what will happen at the end of the year, though there are some reasons because of other suppliers coming back into the market in November and a bit later to assume that things might stabilise a bit.
The Treasury is being asked to step in to help firms affected by the increase in global energy costs. It's understood the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, has submitted a formal bid to secure more support. Police say they believe 4 people died when a car crashed in Bedfordshire in the early hours of yesterday. The vehicle was found in a field just off the A5 between Dunstable and Milton Keynes. The recovery operation will continue tomorrow. Home Office Minister Damien Hines has refused to confirm whether Russian spies stole the British-made COVID-19 vaccine to create its own jab. It's claimed the Oxford AstraZeneca blueprint was used to create Russia's Sputnik 5 jab, something its maker has dismissed as a blatant lie. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 51 points at 71.46. The pound buys $1.37 and €1.17. LBC weather, fog patches over Wales and southern England tonight. Tomorrow, rain in the north, dry in the south, a high of 16 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Andy Ivy.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. Welcome to Monday's edition of Cross Question. I'm Iain Dale. Joining me for the next 60 minutes of topical debate with your questions are Sarah Jones, who is Shadow Policing and Fire Services Minister and Labour MP for Croydon Central. Nadine Batchelor-Hunt is a political correspondent for Yahoo News UK and a political commentator. Robert Courts joins us by Zoom. He's an Aviation and Maritime Minister and Conservative MP for Witney, David Cameron's successor. And Andy Silvester is here, a voice you all know. He's editor of City AM. Now, the lines are already open for your questions. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to call. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk or the LBC YouTube and Facebook feeds.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. We have a cracker of a first question from Mike in Beverley. Mike, hello, go ahead.
Hi, welcome panel, welcome in. My question is, does the panel think that if the government bails out the steel, glass, ceramics and paper industries, their backbenchers will ever forgive them? Or if they don't bail out those industries, will the Red Wall ever forgive them?
And when you say bail out, you presumably mean give support because of the rising energy prices, and all of those industries are very reliant on a huge use of energy.
Absolutely. Support the industries through this hopefully short-term blip.
Andy Silvester, we've been covering this on our business bulletins over the past couple of weeks. This is a real dilemma for the government, isn't it?
It is, indeed, because there are no easy solutions whatsoever. Mike's exactly right that this energy price hike is putting intense pressure on businesses across the country, and it is almost entirely beyond their control. And to be honest, it's slightly beyond the government's control to deal with worldwide natural gas prices and the impact that's having. The question more philosophically for the Tory party is at what point it stops saying to every embattled business or firm or sector, don't worry, we've got your back. We've seen today that there's already been a deal struck to keep carbon dioxide supplies where they need to be. Rishi Sunak, it's quite obvious, would like to draw a line in the sand at some point. That's what this briefing war all weekend has been about, with Kwasi Kwarteng hinting that he was working with Treasury on a package, whereas other bits of the government seem to have adopted the Boris Johnson approach of let's just deal with it and the consequences we'll deal with later. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of days as to whether the headlines get so aggressive or negative, or Boris starts worrying about those red wall seats that he sends a text from Marbella saying fix this, or whether Rishi Sunak will win out. We were talking off air about splits in the Labour Party. There's a split in the Tory Party too.
Sarah Jones, you look at this and it's quite difficult to work out what's going to happen next. Do you think that the government should be stepping in now and providing money for these companies to tide them over? Because if it was only going to be for a few weeks, you could kind of understand that. But this could be months, if not sort of maybe up to a year, some analysts are saying.
Well, the government seems to be approaching this in the way that they approach a lot of other things, which is that Boris Johnson allows a problem to become a crisis and allows chaos around him and allows his ministers to be publicly squabbling with each other as to what's happened.
Which never ends well, does it?
It doesn't end well, and it doesn't help with the crisis. And what Rachel Reeves has said today, she's written to the Chancellor to say, look, at least give us your assessment of how many industries are being affected, how many jobs are going to be affected, and what your plans are if this problem goes on longer than Kwasi Kwarteng, who said it was a blip. What are your plans, and are you talking to business, and have you actually had businesses into the Treasury to talk to them about what's happening? We know, those kind of energy intensive businesses that we need to try and protect. We need them for the long term. We need them for the industries of the future. So the government has to be doing everything they can. At the moment, they just seem to be, blaming business, blaming individuals. Somebody else is always at fault, when the government should be being grown up about this, bringing people together, having a conversation and coming up with a plan.
You say that they're blaming each other. You're right, some people are blaming industry, but isn't that understandable here? Because surely most energy-reliant businesses will have hedged their energy prices for months ahead.
Well, I think you've seen 250% increase in the cost of energy just this year. I mean, this is an extraordinary situation, and it is surrounded by other problems, whether it's access to HGV drivers or other costs going up. So we see a kind of perfect storm of issues, and it is absolutely the government's role in that to try and be an enabler of a solution where it works together with industry. So where there are problems with shortage of workers, what can be done to increase the rights and protections for the workforce and make those jobs more attractive? Where there's shortage of energy costs, what can the government do, as they have done on some small scale with the CO2 issue, which absolutely we need, and now a deal's been done, and apparently we'll have beer at Christmas, but only till that point. And business are crying out for kind of grown-up interaction. They just, businesses, and we saw this through the whole government's approach through Brexit and beyond to businesses, not talking to them, not taking them seriously, and not listening to the concerns and coming up with
Robert Courts, let's come to you on this, because you've got a bit of experience of this, haven't you, in the aviation sector, where throughout the pandemic you've obviously had all of the airlines, the airports, ancillary industries presumably lobbying you for huge amounts of support through the pandemic. You've then had to talk to the Treasury, and that seems to be the situation that Kwasi Kwarteng's in at the moment, and yet the Treasury say that he hasn't been talking to them at all. What are we to make of that?
I think, to be perfectly honest, this has been something that's perhaps slightly overblown. I mean, at any one time within government, there are all sorts of conversations that will be going on between different departments as they work together with Treasury and with others. And that's at the same time as lots of conversations are taking place with the sector that you represent. You're quite right. In my case, the aviation industry, the maritime sector, I speak to all of them very regularly. And the same thing will be true with the BEIS department as well. The business secretary will be talking, I'm quite sure, to all of the sectors that he represents. And that'll be going on an ongoing basis, listening to their concerns and looking for ways that government may be able to help.
But you've got a senior Treasury source here. Apparently it is very senior. And it's Oliver Wright in The Independent was saying this afternoon that this source would not have spoken out without the authorisation of Rishi Sunak. It doesn't give a good impression of a government, a united government, does it?
I don't really want to get into what may have been said by off-the-record briefings. I think really what we just want to focus on is the reality that at any one time within government, you're going to be talking to all of your colleagues at ministerial level as well as the sector. That'll be going on normally the rest of the time, and I don't think there's any particular surprise in that.
Well, I realise that you're not on this programme to make government policy and announce it, but just with your experience over the past year and a half, when you have these conversations with the Treasury, I mean, their objective presumably is to spend as little as money as possible, and your objective as the Transport Minister is to get as much money out of them as possible. How do you approach that?
Well, I think we can see the results. I mean, the Treasury has produced a world-beating package of, to about £400 billion worth of economic support through the course of COVID. That, of course, has been broken down to a number of different schemes across all sectors. And so you can see that as concerns are passed back, as people feed in, that clearly is something that's forthcoming. We've seen that happen then. And you're right, I can't go into what may or may not happen in this case, but we can see the very clear record in the past where the Treasury and the government as a whole has really stepped up to help people in their hour of need.
Nadine, let's come to the politics of this, because as Mike in Beverley says, if the government bails out these industries or provides financial support to some of these energy companies, do you think that will have the support of Conservative backbenchers?
I think, one of the huge things about Brexit was, not outsourcing steel, making steel be built in the UK, and therefore allowing British steel and industries like that to kind of survive. I think if this energy crisis isn't dealt with, a lot of red walls, we call them, seats will feel quite betrayed. When I was at the Conservative conference, there are Conservative MPs who are new MPs in the red wall that do feel like they aren't important and they aren't being listened to, particularly when they're kind of touted as these, oh look, we've won these seats, this is the future of the Conservative Party, and privately they just kind of feel ignored. So I feel if this steel situation isn't dealt with, and we already know that the Conservatives are losing a lot of their gains according to polling within these red wall seats. I think one of them was kind of Tories at 41 and Labour at 40. I think this could backfire quite badly for the government, and these communities have really suffered in recessions and things like that. If you leave them behind again, I think it could have an impact on the voters, and also I feel like their MPs could feel quite betrayed as well.
I think that's absolutely right. And I mean, you look at the impact that the universal credit cut is having on red wall seats. There was a new figures out today showing 500 million are going to be pounds are being taken out of the 54 red wall seats from the universal credit cut. People are going to find this autumn, this winter very difficult, and if they can see the industry around them struggling as well, and perhaps more serious than that, then I think it is going to have a big impact on the government support.
And Andy, what are we talking about in terms of money here? If the government did say, OK, we recognise that these are unprecedented circumstances, we're going to help, are we talking about 1, 2, 10, 50 billion?
It's hard to put a figure on it, but it's certainly in the billions. I mean, that's the sort of figure that used to bring the Treasury out in a cold sweat. But obviously over the past 18 months, that's sort of pocket change these days. But I think there's another point here about the government response and what they're relying on, I think, at the moment with this energy crisis in the appeal to those red wall voters is all around the energy cap. It's about keeping the lights on. It's about saying you're not going to get charged more as a consumer, which is all true and all very jolly. When the bill falls on the mat, it's going to be punchier than it might have been last year, but it's still not going to be too much. But it's disingenuous to say that there aren't going to be costs to consumers from this, because these companies will either be bailed out and potentially keep doing what they're doing and keep doing business at higher prices. Those will eventually end up with consumers. We already know that food prices are going up in large part due to the energy crisis and various other shortages. So sure, it might not be the energy bills going up, but the cost of living elsewhere is going up as well. And you look back at the energy cap, and we're now talking about businesses saying costs going through the roof here, can we get some help? And actually they're being sort of doubly screwed really, because the energy cap is meaning that the market is broken, so to speak, when it comes to consumer energy, because suppliers can't pass on the cost to consumers without breaching the energy cap. So where they're trying to make up those margins is what they're charging businesses.
I remember when the energy cap was introduced, Ed Miliband was sort of saying about the cost of living crisis. Well, we've got that on steroids now, haven't we, potentially?
Well, not if you listen to the Prime Minister at party conference speech. You'd think everything was smelling of roses. But no, I mean, we've got an absolute crisis and a perfect storm of all kinds of issues that the government have seen coming, have done nothing about, and are now, trying to, downplay. I think people are going to find it really difficult, whether it's, NI or whether it's universal credit or whether it's access to, food food and the things that we need, or whether it's, what's coming down the line as well. I mean, I saw, various articles today about how we think there's going to be shortages of all kinds of seasonal jobs over Christmas. So the people that do the gritting in our local authorities, the kind of extra bin men that we need to recruit, all of these kind of jobs, we're also going to struggle.
Sarah.
Bins people.
Yes.
Yes, you're absolutely right. But we're going to struggle with all of those kind of jobs. Social care, we know there's an absolute chronic shortage of labour, and the government need to be looking and trying to find solutions of all of this.
Robert, just finally on this, obviously, look, there are things that government can do. There may be things that government should have predicted, but there are lots of external pressures here which are affecting lots of other countries throughout the world. Do you feel slightly helpless in this situation where you know that there are some things that you can do, but actually you are in the hands of the energy markets to a large extent?
So you're right to point out that this is, in many cases, a lot of the issues that we'll be discussing tonight are ones that are global. I mean, they've been brought about because of the incredible economic dislocation that COVID's brought to us. And so we're not alone in having to deal with those things. What the government is here to do and is doing is making sure that we're putting the right steps in place. I mean, for example, on the gas market, I mean, when the country has quite a diverse gas market, actually about 50% of it is produced here in the UK. Much of the rest of that that's come from abroad comes from Norway. They're increasing their supply as well. So there is already a diversification that's taking place there that helps with some of the skills that we've been talking about as well. And the government is bringing in temporary visas to assist with that. But I think we also ought to just look at the positives out of this. There are, of course, challenges coming out of a massive public health challenge like this, and the massive economic shock that we've seen as the economies of all countries across the world have been dislocated. But there are a number of things that we should look at which give us very good grounds to build on. I mean, things like employees on payrolls are back at pre-pandemic levels. Job vacancies are exceeding 1 million, first time in recorded history that's taken place. Average earnings are increasing in real terms. So there's a number of positive things as well which underpin economic growth going forward.
I mean, it sounds good that there are 1 million job vacancies, but there have to be the people there to fill them with the requisite skills, I suppose. That's the downside of that. Mike, thank you very much for your question. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to our panel. It's 16 minutes past 8.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:20, you're watching or listening to Cross Question on LBC. Nadine, Batchelor-Hunt, Sarah Jones, Andy Silvester and Robert Court. See, if I haven't got the list in front of me, I always forget one. And Robert Court's with me answering your calls, 0345 6060 973. I just wanted to call you Alan there for some strange reason.
Partridge-esque.
Alex is in Watford. Alex, what's your question, please?
Good evening, Ian and panel.
Hi.
Does the panel agree it's good for Boris Johnson to go on holiday to Spain after getting Brexit done?
Oh, a little bit of sarcasm there I detect in your question, Alex. Let's go to the two politicians on our panel first, because I always think this is an interesting one. Whenever a politician goes on holiday, whoever it is, whenever it is, they get criticised, and especially if you're Prime Minister when there's a bit of a crisis going on. But frankly, if you're Prime Minister, there's always a bit of a crisis going on. I get, well, particularly maybe with this one, he said, adding to the sarcasm in Alex's question. Robert Courts, do you begrudge politicians' holidays? Obviously, you're going to say that Boris Johnson is quite right to have a break. I completely get that. But have you ever had criticism on this scale, particularly as Aviation Minister, when you jet off somewhere?
So look, I don't know. I think politicians are people like everyone else, and it's politicians need time with their families. We're in a parliamentary recess, and the purpose of that is to take a bit of time away from Parliament, a bit of time with the family, and I think that that will lead ultimately to us making better decisions because we'll be refreshed and because we'll have had that little bit of time just taking things a little bit easier. And that's true of the Prime Minister as it is of everyone else. But I think we ought to be absolutely clear about this, that the Prime Minister isn't off duty. I mean, he's not out of contact. As we all know from the last 18 months, and in fact, I'm doing it now, you can be just as in contact over telephone and over Zoom and over Teams as you can as if you're in the office. So the Prime Minister will be absolutely plugged into everything that's going on. But should he be allowed a little bit of time away? Yes, I think he absolutely should.
Why is Parliament still in recess? Because the party conferences are all over. Normally, Parliament goes back the week after the Conservative conference finishes.
Yes, it's a slightly unusual timescale this year. The timescale will have been, the recess dates will have been set a while ago, and of course we'll be back to work next week. It just gives MPs of all colours, of all parties, just a little bit of time away, back in their constituencies, because the constituency work's always the focus of everything you do. So you need that time still, also to be with your family, but also to do the constituency work too. But we'll be back next week.
Hang on a second, Nadine. I just want to quickly go to Sarah. Sarah, is Keir Starmer on holiday? Because we've heard nothing from him over the last few days, and surely this is a time when the leader of the opposition should be absolutely laying into the government.
Well, look, I mean, it's one thing first to say is it's telling all the civil servants they have to go back to work and be in the office when Robert has literally just said you can work from home just as easily is a little bit, double standards. Let's decide whether all those civil servants have to work in the office or not. But look, I actually know that what Keir is doing tomorrow, so I know he's certainly not on holiday tomorrow. And of course, people are entitled to holidays. Of course, no, I can't tell you. Of course, people are entitled to holidays. But look, I think there are two questions. One is, what does the Prime Minister do when he is here? Because when he is here, he's not fixing the crisis. So, I mean, I'm not sure it makes that much difference whether he's here or there. But the other question, which I think is a reasonable one, is when you do stay in the home of people you've just given a peerage to, that doesn't feel quite right. And I think that's a legitimate point to make. But of course, everyone deserves a holiday. And of course, to be fair,
you're talking about Zach Goldsmith, and Zach Goldsmith is a personal friend of Boris Johnson's wife. So, I mean, I hear what you say there, but
you know what I mean? I think people.
No, I know. I do know what you mean.
You're
saying it doesn't pass the sniff test.
No, that's exactly what I'm saying. But of course, he needs a break like everybody else. But this is a particular moment of crisis in our country.
But where's the leader of the opposition? I mean, I know you say you know what he's doing tomorrow, but what's he been doing for the last few days?
Well, I don't know. I don't know whether, I mean, I don't know who is around at any given moment in time.
Yeah, but this is what opposition is all about, isn't it? I'm just thinking, if this had happened to John Major in 1995, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown would have been on the media all day, every day, ramming Labour's point home, and that's just not happening.
Well, I've seen on the media today Rachel Reeves, I've seen Ed Miliband, I've seen various shadow ministers, holding the government
and
to
you
account
here tonight.
And asking, and I'm here tonight, and I'm going up to Yorkshire this week, and I'm going up to Manchester, and I'm looking at antisocial behaviour, and I'm
should have come to Manchester last week. You'd have had a great time.
Well, I should have done.
Nadine.
So I was basically going to make the same point. The Prime Minister saying you can work from Spain after we've seen splashed over the front pages, get back to the office, get back to work. You can't do the same quality of work if you're not working in the office. I just think I don't really think it's fair to the public to kind of introduce these double standards. So that was my own point on the kind of working abroad thing. I understand that he deserves to have a break. If I recall rightly, he did have a holiday over the summer when Afghanistan was kind of...
Yeah, I think he came back after a day.
Yeah, but at the same time, we are in a crisis in this country heading into winter. We've got the universal credit cut, which is going to throw so many people so deeply into poverty. We've got this energy crisis. You've got cabinet ministers arguing with... Technically, it's a source, but you've got the Treasury arguing with Bayes. I don't know. I feel like, yes, it's Parliament's in recess, but I think it's an important time to have some leadership. So, that's my view on it anyway.
Andy?
Penny for the thoughts of Dominic Raab, I'd suggest, who as Foreign Secretary was on holiday in Crete, didn't get back in time, according to various officials, to deal with the Kabul airlift, and is now Justice Secretary. I imagine he's got some interesting thoughts. Look, I think politicians are hostages to fortune whenever they book holidays, usually. I mean, Sajid Javid has run into trouble with it previously on another steel crisis back in the day. Raab was another one. It's probably not the most politically savvy move for Boris. If Boris was a normal politician to go away in the middle of the cost of living crisis, that's what I described the other day. But Boris is an unusual politician, tends to get away with these things and in a way that perhaps others don't. What I would say about the general theme of how we talk about politicians and holidays and various other things, I do wonder if Blair Brown, Alistair Campbell and the others on the other side who have laid into politicians over the years for doing such things wonder, and I put MPs' pay in this bracket as well, wonder whether it's contributed to an improvement in the quality of our political discourse and the people who want to be politicians, because I frankly have got no idea why Robert and Sarah do what they do with the amount of stick they get if they go away on holiday. And is that necessarily good for our politics? Is that necessarily good for the decisions that are being made in Britain and for thinking about the future? If in order to go into it, you have to sacrifice not just your private life to the needs of your constituents, your sort of free time to the needs of your constituents, but your private life and your decisions to scrutiny as well. I wonder whether they think that it's helped or hindered our political discourse.
Sarah, do you have this where if you want to go on holiday, you kind of think, well, if I go off to Mauritius for a couple of weeks, people are going to say, oh, get her, she's gone off to Mauritius, and maybe I should go and stay in a youth hostel in Bognor Regis or something.
I've never been to Mauritius. No, I'm unlikely to be going.
I haven't either.
Sadly.
But you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, and I'll give there you are under scrutiny, you are. But to your point, I think that the advantages of it, the privileges that you have as an MP are such that you are. That scrutiny is worth, not the abuse, but the scrutiny is worth it. And I think, yes, I think about where am I going to go on holiday and when am I going to go, and yeah, I do think about that. But that's fine. I also get to vote on changes in the law, and that's it's pretty important that I'm accessible to people, I think.
Robert, can I ask if you've been away this summer and where and for how long?
So yes, you can, and I haven't, I'm afraid. But my decisions are largely dictated by the 5-year-old and the 2-year-old that I have, and so of course the decisions always have to be subject to their needs. But I do think it's really important that politicians are allowed to get that break for the reason that I've said. I just think it's with any walk of life, you will be refreshed, you will come back renewed, you'll make better decisions as a result of it, and I think we do need to keep an eye on that.
Well, I must admit, whenever I go on holiday, which isn't that often, but if I go for 2 weeks, I only ever start feeling that I've been on holiday after about 10 days. It's only the last bit where I think, I'm refreshed now and I want to go back. And I'm only a radio presenter. If I was Prime Minister, I think I'd probably need 4 weeks to recover. And I mean, Boris Johnson, given what he went through last year, I don't think that he's had more than a few days off at all, which I don't know about anybody else, but I don't want my Prime Minister to be knackered all the time. Nadine?
Yeah, I think there is that argument as well. Of course, I just think perhaps Christmas time is a better time to take it. Maybe when not like Easter, when things are a bit quieter. I don't think as this energy crisis is escalating, people don't know how they're going to heat their homes. As I said, the universal credit cuts are going to potentially push up to 800,000 people further into poverty. It just feels like, swanning off to Spain. But I agree, people do need to have a break. I don't think it's healthy for people to just work. But I also think he's Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. There is a certain level of, you get that job, you may not be able to take holiday when you want to take holiday. If you're in a national crisis or a pandemic, it's kind of a sacrifice.
Well, of course, Margaret Thatcher hated holidays and almost refused to go on them. And I think, didn't Gordon Brown, he was dragged to Suffolk on holiday, and then there was, what was it? Was it an outbreak of foot and mouth or something? Was it the flooding? There was something.
It was flooding.
He said, no, I've got to go back. And he did. But I'm not. He always looked completely knackered in the job, didn't he?
Of course, Theresa May's last holiday, I think, as Prime Minister was also the one where she called that incredibly successful 2017 election when she went walking in Wales for the weekend. So maybe holidays are not good ideas.
Controversial. More of your calls to come. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:30 on LBC. News headlines with Andy Ivey.
It's understood the Business Secretary has formally requested Treasury assistance for businesses affected by rising gas prices. Labour says there's a danger that jobs could be lost and industry's long-term prospects damaged. Britain's main supplier of carbon dioxide is going to increase its prices as a part of a government-brokered deal to maintain deliveries to a wide range of industries. CF Fertilisers closed 2 plants last month because of the energy crisis. A man has admitted the manslaughter of one of Britain's wealthiest men, Sir Richard Sutton, but Thomas Schreiber denies murdering the hotelier in Dorset in April. He'll stand trial next month. LBC weather, fog patches over Wales and southern England tonight. Tomorrow, patchy rain for Scotland, Northern Ireland, North West Wales and northern and eastern England. But further south, dry and brighter with some sunny spells and a high of 16 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:34 on LBC. With me for the next 25 minutes answering your questions, Nadine Batchelor-Hunt, the political commentator, Labour MP and Shadow Policing Minister Sarah Jones, Andy Silvester, editor of City AM, and the Transport Minister and Conservative MP Robert Courts. Now, I can't really believe I'm going to read this question out from Martha in Blackpool on a text, but I'm going to. It's emerged today that best-selling author Sally Rooney, she of Normal People, will not allow her latest book to be translated into Hebrew. She's a known supporter of the BDS movement, but isn't this heading towards conflating Judaism and Israel? Nadine.
So I'm Jewish, and I would say yes, it is conflating Judaism and Israel. The Hebrew was revived after the founding of the State of Israel, but before that, it's the language of the Torah, it's the language of Jewish texts. Boycotting the language rather than, if you support BDS, that's one thing. It's got a lot of people
explain what BDS is.
So boycott, divest, and sanction. I'm not an expert in it, but basically it's a Palestinian-led campaign that calls for the boycotting of Israeli products or exports, that kind of thing, in protest of the occupation. It has been controversial for various reasons, but if you want to know what BDS is, that's what it is. The idea that you boycotting Hebrew is part of BDS. I personally would be very interested to see if people within BDS would agree with that, leadership within BDS would agree with that. You tend to see a lot of people kind of co-opting these causes and taking it so far that it almost kind of destroys the message they're trying to get across anyway. Because if you're Jewish and you're seeing that someone is boycotting the language of your religion, effectively, all of Jewish texts, obviously there's Yiddish and there's kind of there's dialects, but Hebrew is fundamentally the language of the Jewish people. If you're boycotting that rather than boycotting Israel, that is conflating Judaism and Israel, and it's deeply concerning. And unfortunately, stories like this are becoming, I believe, we're hearing more about them, more frequent. But yeah, I find that pretty shocking. And I think, does that mean that if she sees Jewish people praying in a synagogue on Shabbat or for Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah, does she think that's in some way got something to do with the State of Israel? It's bizarre. And yeah, this will be a very upsetting... I'm Jewish, and I think this will be a lot of upsetting story for a lot of other Jewish people as well. The idea that the language of our ancestors and our religious books is in some way wrong or bad. I find that quite shocking, to be honest.
Andy Silvester.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo that, I think. And there's no... people can make their own decisions, commercial decisions, fine. It's just, essentially going on strike. But yeah, it's shocking. It doesn't sit right. And I'm afraid there's no excuse for it. We have talked ad nauseum about anti-Semitism, rightly, for the last few years, in large part due to Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party, frankly. And there's no excuse anymore to be ignorant about this stuff. And it's not like Sally Rooney is stupid. It's not like she can't work these things out. It's just a bit lazy, and it's just depressing, isn't it? And you turn it on its head. Would you say that your book couldn't be published in Mandarin to protest about the treatment of Uyghur Muslims? I don't think that's happening. I could be corrected by Sally Rooney's publishers, but I doubt it. Would it not be published in Arabic to protest Saudi Arabia's treatment of LGBTQ people? I don't know that there's always going to be that.
That's an interesting point you make there, is that her publisher will have bought the rights to her books off her. And it's actually up to the publisher, not Sally Rooney, to decide which languages they sell rights to. So I'm not sure that it's within her power to stop her publisher selling rights to an Israeli publisher.
It's also... the whole, I mean, you'll know more about the publishing industry than any of us, Ian, but I do find it strange also that there's no rationale from Sally Rooney. It's sort of emerged via a publication forward, and people understandably on social media, pretty grumpy about it. It will be interesting to see what happens. And as I say, you flip it on its head, it goes back to that old question that we've spoken about for so many years, is if this was about anything other than Israel, would it be happening? And in issues like that, it's just difficult to imagine that it would.
Robert Courts, are you a fan of Normal People? Did you watch that? I mean, she was the author of the book, and then it was made into a best-selling drama series. She's obviously an incredibly talented woman, but what do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, she may well be very talented, but that's no excuse for the sort of actions that we've seen here. I mean, I absolutely deplore not only anti-Semitism, but anything that leads to an increase in anti-Semitism. I simply cannot understand how this action is meant to increase understanding or tolerance of anybody or anything out anywhere throughout the world. It strikes me as deeply unhelpful.
Sarah?
I completely agree. It seems a very peculiar thing for her to have done, and I don't really quite understand what she hopes to be saying by it. And we all know, as we've all said, we've spent years talking about the difference between being a critic of the Israeli government and the Jewish community, the 300,000 Jewish people that live in this country. I mean, it's clearly not going to help. It seems a very strange and not a good thing for her to be doing. Great book that she wrote. I mean, I don't really quite understand where it's come from, but it's when you go on, as we all now do, anti-Semitism training, and you see the kind of tropes and the way that they kind of creep in this conflation of the two, really, evilly, and how much we need to avoid it. So yes.
You say when you go on anti-Semitism training, as we all do, is that now mandatory for Labour MPs?
We're all encouraged to do training, which I've done. I've spent a day with the anti-Semitism APPG, gone to Jewish schools, Jewish communities, talked to people. I mean, it's quite an important thing to do, I think.
Right, let's move on. John is in Feltham. Hello, John.
Hello. I'd like to ask if you'd agree with the climate crisis and ban flights for less 3 hours.
So would you like to ban flights that are less than 3 hours long to help solve the climate crisis? Well, there's only one place we can go first, and that's to the Aviation Minister, Robert Courts. Well, what would that... I mean, if that happened, obviously all domestic flights would be banned, but flights to a lot of European capitals would be banned too, I guess.
Yes, and no, I don't agree with that. I think what we have to work towards is guilt-free flying, so that you're able to fly and to remember at all times that it's not flying that is the problem, it's emissions that are a problem, and that's what we have to tackle. Happily, there's a lot of strides taking place going towards this already. I mean, of course, in government, we've set up the Jet Zero Council, which is working towards a transatlantic net zero aircraft within a generation. But there's a lot of work taking place on short haul already. For example, hydrogen electric and some battery as well. And hydrogen electric in particular is something that's very, very promising. I saw the first flight of a hydrogen electric aircraft approximately a year ago. And only a few weeks ago, I saw the next aircraft that the company called Zero Avia are working on, which is a Dornier 20-seater. And they'll then be looking to scale up to a larger aircraft after that. So one of the difficulties with what's proposed here is that if you cut out those shorter flights, you'll cut out some of the technology. And we need that technology in order to fly longer distances and to make sure the world stays connected, which I firmly believe is a good thing from the point of view of travel, of experience, of trade. And I think we probably all support that. So no, I don't agree. I also don't think it's necessary, because I think that technology is coming along at pace. There's a lot of technological, and so I've talked about airframe types, but let's not also forget there are things like sustainable aviation fuels, which you'll be hearing more about later this year, which is drop-in sustainable fuels going into existing aircraft types. And you also have many efficiencies taking place within aircraft as they are, which mean that the aircraft that are flying around now may look similar to those that were flying around 20 or 30 years ago, but they're much more efficient. So I don't agree with the suggestion. I don't think it's necessary.
Nadine?
It's a tough one. I think, first of all, I don't think all flights should be banned just in case, you can't travel for whatever reason by road or by train. I think until we have a good infrastructure where you can travel quickly and get from A to B, on the continent, it's easy to get across for us, to get across the channel. We don't have fast trains. We don't have that level of connectivity. So I'm split. I think domestic flights, I'm probably going to be travelling up to Glasgow for COP26, and I'm probably going to get the train. As more convenient it would be to get a flight up there, I'll get the train. So I think there is an argument for that, but I also think we should be careful about banning things. I think maybe reducing things, trying to stop the consumption of things. I think when you start banning things, it starts to become this really polarising thing, and you can't start having conversations about it. But yeah, that's my view on it. But climate change is a huge thing, and if we can start getting more environmentally friendly flights as well, that's only a bonus.
Okay. Andy?
Yeah, I mean, so this, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the campaign for better transport, if you're listening, but I think it was them that said, ban domestic flights. And their rationale was ban domestic flights and rapidly improve the rail infrastructure and various other bits around the country to make it sort of more feasible to get a train from Glasgow to Euston. I don't think it's that much of a problem anyway, but... no, you don't ban things. Nadine's absolutely right. Like, stop this obsession with banning things, this obsession with making people feel bad about doing things that are enjoyable. We've just had 18 months essentially locked up, and even during the bits of sort of non-lockdown that we were in theory able to go away on holiday, no offence, Minister, it was a nightmare. Allow us to have a holiday in Mallorca for 2 weeks. Allow us to go to Spain, because culture broadens the mind. It improves our understanding of the world. And frankly, if you want to improve people's sort of feelings and emotions towards climate change, you want people to see beautiful things, and I'm afraid they don't all exist in South London. You have to travel.
Cultural visit to Benidorm, I totally agree. Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, so Gatwick Airport is near to where I live, and I actually worked with them before I became an MP, and I was talking to them recently about hydrogen planes and the future of clean aviation, and that certainly will be a future, but it won't be for 10-20 years before that is feasible on a kind of scale. So I think until that point, absolutely we need to improve our public transport. If you're going to rural Cornwall or parts of rural Wales, or of course the infrastructure sometimes means people end up getting flights when they should be on a train. But I think for individuals, the approach of don't necessarily give up meat entirely, but maybe only eat it 2 days a week, or don't that kind of approach of people thinking about what they're doing and thinking about alternatives. But of course, people want to go on holiday.
It's nudging people to do the right thing,
exactly,
isn't it?
Exactly.
In the end, John, thank you very much for your call. More in a moment. It's 8:46.
LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Weekday mornings from 7.
Conservative MP and Security Minister Damien Hines. Mr Kwarteng has said, I'm working very closely with Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, to get us through this situation. Yeah. To which the Treasury has responded, this is not the first time the Business Secretary has made things up in an interview. How concerned should my listeners be that we seem to have an apparent fantasist as the Business Secretary?
I don't think he is making things up.
So Rishi Sunak's lying.
Government ministers in contact with each other the whole time.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player, LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
It's 10 to 9. Nadine, Batchelor-Hunt, Sarah Jones, Andy Silvester, Robert Courts with me answering your questions. Nigella, no, not that one, in Nuneaton has texted. Around 2,000 allegations of sexual misconduct have been levelled against serving police officers in the last 4 years. Are the police beyond help? Sarah Jones, Shadow Policing Minister.
No, they're not beyond help at all. But we do need to take this moment very seriously of what has occurred, both before and after, in particular the murder of Sarah Everard and other vulnerable women, and the allegations that have come to light about sexual misconduct that were in the Times today and in other places. So I think we need a proper root and branch review on a statutory footing so that we can look at vetting and how that works. My sense, having read all of the vetting processes, the hundreds of pages of vetting processes, is that they're very historical. So they're based on, if you're going to be a police officer, are you likely to be blackmailed? Are you likely to have debt that means that criminal networks can kind of blackmail you? There isn't really much of a focus of, are you what is your character, and are you going to, be a suitable person to be with vulnerable people? So looking at people's social media, for example, when they're vetted, that is a kind of quite ad hoc, done differently in different forces. And then once you're in the police force, if there are allegations made against you, the way in which those kind of processes are in place, quite secretive, not necessarily, doing the right thing. So I think there's a whole raft of actions that we need to take to make sure, we have a service that is completely.
You say an inquiry on a statutory footing. Obviously, the Cressida Dick has announced an internal inquiry headed by Dame, well, she's now Baroness, isn't she, Louise Casey?
Yes.
Now, anyone that knows Louise Casey knows that she doesn't stop until she gets to the truth. Why does it need to be on a statutory footing?
Because there's two different things. There's what happens in London and there's what happens nationally. And what the Home Secretary has said is that once we have the report from the IOPC, which is looking at the circumstances surrounding the murder of Sarah Everard and what may or may not have been missed in the run-up to her murder, once we've had that, there will be a review across the board, because of course Sarah Everard's murderer worked in lots of different police forces, not just the Met, and this goes across all of those forces. The Met, of course, with 44,000 officers is the largest, but there are plenty of other police forces that need to have the same, we need to be looking at as well. So whether it's the vetting, whether it's what happens when people are doing things and allegations are made against them, and the cultural stuff as well. And, there are some fantastic, I was talking to my local police force today, they are putting in place, lots of measures proactively to try and make sure female police officers are comfortable coming forward if they have issues, if they're worried about people, to make sure, when there are non-uniformed police officers out on the street, there's always a man with a woman. They're already making changes, but I think the calls from lots of very sensible people that this is a watershed moment and we need to do something on a scale of Macpherson is right. And I think that's what, all of the police officers that I've spoken to have said we need as well.
I'm going to ask the other three panellists to be very concise in your answers, because I want to get another question in, which is quite an important one. Andy?
Are the police beyond help? No, I don't think they are, but they're certainly not nearly as accountable as they should be. I think it's quite clear now that the Police and Crime Commissioner experiment has not worked. It has not notably improved the leadership of police forces around the country. And of course, referencing the Met, Londoners don't really have any way of holding the Met Commissioner to account. In theory, yes, the Commissioner is responsible to the Mayor, so in theory, yes, your vote for Mayor has an effect on the Commissioner, but it's fundamentally a Home Office appointment, and Londoners have no real way of saying, as I personally feel as London, that the Met Police Commissioner should not be in the job once this inquiry is finished, no matter the conclusions.
What do you think about that, Sarah?
About? Should
she be in the job? Should she not have been replaced?
Well, she's in the job for the next 2 years. It hasn't been extended for a full contract. It's for next 2 years so that they can find her replacement. It's not overly helpful for me to say she should go or she should say. I mean, I think, you know,
but you're not giving her a ringing endorsement. Let's put it that way.
No, but I respect a lot of what she's done over her career. I spoke to her last week about what she's planning and what she's doing in the Met in response to the Sarah Everard and other issues. I think she has many strengths, and I think when you're in a massive police force like that, the first woman ever to do it, it's tough. But of course, there've been a series of questions.
Cindy says, Andy is my star of tonight's panel. Every answer so far has been perfect for me. You've got a fan, Andy.
It's a lot easier being a journalist and a politician. I don't have lines to take.
Well, the one thing I will say on the police
Nadine.
is that if you talk to campaigners against racism, if you talk to black people have been saying there's a problem with the police pretty much as long as we've been here, and you talk about McPherson report, but, you know, racial profiling in the police is still a problem. You know, if people were listening to black people about the severity of the issues within the police when it comes to policing, when it comes to, you know, the amount of black people are assaulted by the police. I mean, I've got family members that have been assaulted by the police, and the police have admitted in fact, one of them was interviewed under caution. All I'm going to say is listen to some black campaigners when they tell you there's a problem with the police, because there really is. It's not like we've just been saying it for fun. And you talk about, as I said, you talk about McPherson. A lot of black people are still waiting for this kind of proper structural change.
Robert.
And clearly, in the aftermath of this absolutely horrifying crime, we are going to want to learn lessons that need learning. And I think the review that we've heard, that two-stage review, will look to do that as we look, first of all, at what happened in the immediate run-up to Sarah's tragic murder. But then, of course, the second part of it, which deals with any systemic failures as well, we'll have to look at that too. Equally, however, I'm conscious there are many thousands of policemen and women up and down the country who are in it for the right reasons, trying to do the right thing. I think we need to remember that as well.
OK, thank you very much, Nigella, for that question. Let's move on to Farouk in Woolwich. I'm not sure that any of you will have a definitive answer for Farouk, but I think it's important that he makes his point. Farouk, hi, what would you like to ask? Farouk, are you there? Well, he isn't there, so I've got his question here anyway. His question is, my children are still in Afghanistan. When will the government carry on getting people out? Robert, this whole situation has gone a bit quiet. Do you know what efforts are being made to keep getting people out?
Well, clearly this has been a really difficult situation. And I do, my heart goes out to Farouk and to his family's situation. I can't give any further details at the moment. There are, of course, efforts ongoing, but naturally for reasons of security and safety, we have to be fairly quiet and guarded about that.
Do you understand that, Sarah?
No, I don't understand that response at all. I mean, the settlement scheme hasn't been announced. I've got 600 people in Afghanistan that my constituents are desperately trying to get out of the country. Now, they are in very many different circumstances, and some of them will definitely not get out of the country. You know, some of them will not, I don't think, fulfil any criteria that the government set, but the point is they haven't set it yet. We don't know what that scheme is going to be. So I have British nationals' parents whose children are in Afghanistan, who, I have people who worked for the Afghan government in very senior positions who are in hiding in Afghanistan. It's desperate, and a lot of people are coming to my surgeries and saying, what can we do? And I don't know how to help them, and it's really sad.
Andy and Nadine, have you got anything to add to this, or can I move on to the
I just don't
question?
think the government's response has been good enough on that, and I don't think, if someone's got a family member stuck there, the response of, I can't talk about it, is good enough, really. That's my view.
It's difficult, but it should be a priority.
Right, final text question from Chloe in Croydon. It's Black History Month. Please ask the panel which black personality, past or present, they admire and why. Nadine.
Other than various family members, Sam Cooke, his song Change Is Gonna Come is still a song that makes me cry when I listen to it, and I advise all your viewers, listeners to listen to it. It tells a story in itself, and it seems to be timeless, so that's the person I'm going to say for now.
Andy?
Many, but in recent times I thought the way that Michael Holding spoke out about racism in the United Kingdom as a cricket broadcaster in the sport of cricket, which is not exactly known for its forward-looking and progressive values still to this day, unfortunately, was exceptionally brave and exceptionally important in the aftermath of the Black Lives Matter protests last year.
Robert?
I'd have to say Martin Luther King, partly because of the spellbinding oratory that I listened to when I was very young and made a deep impact on me, but also because of the central message of treating people according to the content of their character rather than the colour of their skin, I think is the way we should treat people.
Sarah?
I think probably... in part because she was at a conference last week, but Doreen Lawrence, when you have lost so much and you still have the strength to fight for so long, so many years for change, I mean, she's just extraordinary.
I'm going to say Trevor Phillips for refusing to go with the flow. I think that's a good enough reason. Right, thank you very much indeed. Nadine, Batchelor-Hunt, Sarah Jones, Andy Silvester and Robert Courts. Don't forget, if you miss any Cross Question, you can catch up on the Cross Question podcast or indeed on the LBC YouTube channel and Global Player. You're listening to LBC. It's 9 o'clock. In a minute, we're going to talk about British Airways, who've today told their pilots and flight attendants not to use the phrase, ladies and gentlemen. What do you make of that? It's 9 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Labour is warning that firms could collapse unless the government does more to help with soaring energy prices. The Business Secretary has written to the Treasury to ask for more assistance. Representatives from the steel, ceramics and